Now, when it comes to the deadlift, there's plenty of videos out there that are going to demonstrate technique, say the stiff-legged deadlift versus Romanian or a traditional deadlift. But what I think is even more important than just showing you the right way to do it is helping you understand how they work and why you would do one versus another. So we're going to keep today's video very focused, only comparing a stiff-legged deadlift and a Romanian deadlift because they're very similar. We'll talk about a traditional deadlift on a different occasion and then compare all of them together. Now, stiff-legged deadlift, it sounds like your legs are going to be totally stiff like this. That's not the case. We want to actually start with a slight bend in our legs, and we're going to keep that bend the entire time. Why do we want to do that? Well, because when we start to bend at the knee, this is when we start to engage the quads. So both of these movements are going to be posterior chain focused, meaning glutes, hamstrings, and low back. So we want to minimize movement at the knee and focus on movement at the hip. So a slight bend at the knee, and we're keeping that constant. Now with a stiff-legged deadlift, we're going to keep that bar close to our body. We're going to initiate the movement by pushing our butt back. So we're not bending forward to lower the bar. The bar lowers as we push our butt back. And so we're going to go down, keeping the bar close to our legs. At this point, you feel a lot of tension in the hamstring, and there's probably a natural stopping point unless you're super flexible in your hamstrings. You probably won't be able to go all the way to the floor. In order to do so, you're going to have to bend your back a little bit. And that is going to be your stiff-legged deadlift. So it actually starts from the floor. So let me actually perform the exercise. So I'm going to step to the bar. I prefer overhand grip, both hands. Some people do a split grip. I don't recommend it because when you supinate your hand like this, you're putting the biceps tendon at risk, especially when you're pulling a lot of weight. You can do it, but do it at your own risk. So overhand grip. Slight bend in the knees. This is our starting position, so you're pushing that butt backwards. There is a slight rounding of the back here, and we are going to push that pelvis forward and straighten our back. Now we do the opposite, pushing that butt backwards and a slight round in the back to the floor. So that's going to be our stiff-legged deadlift. So now all that movement is going to be at the hip, but you notice we also get a little bit of movement in the spine. So what does that mean? Well, that means we're working our hamstrings, our glutes, and also the muscles in our low back, our spinal erectors. Just keep in mind that with our stiff-legged deadlift, that is the big difference, is the movement in the spine. So I'll demonstrate a Romanian deadlift. Now, typically, most people start a Romanian off a rack. They won't start it off the floor, but you can start off the floor for your first rep and obviously your last one when you set it down. Because our starting position is going to be here as opposed to the floor. So just like our stiff-legged deadlift, initiate by pushing that butt back, keeping the bar close to the legs, back straight. You feel that tension in the hamstring until you really can't go any further without bending your back, keeping the back relatively straight, pushing that pelvis forward. So your two primary differences, one, you're starting the movement from the floor and finishing on the floor with every rep. That's going to be your stiff-legged deadlift. And you're getting more movement in the back. So if we were to come over here to a hyperextension machine, this is actually a great training tool to help you understand the difference. Because we're not using any weight, so we're not distracted. We can just focus purely on technique. So if I were to keep my back perfectly straight, and this, I want you to try this so you can feel the difference. So back straight, you're going to go down until you feel that point where you feel a really strong stretch in the hamstrings. That's our stopping point. If we want to focus on glutes and hamstrings, this would be the equivalent of a Romanian deadlift. And keeping the back straight, we come back up. Now, if I wanted to focus on working more of the low back, I would come down and I would go ahead and I would round out my back. And now you can see I can come all the way under here. I don't feel that same tension on the hamstring. As we come back up, I go ahead and straighten the back. So why is this important? Well, one, it's going to help you feel the difference between the two, the tension that you feel in the hamstrings. When you feel that tension in the hamstrings, it's also a good signal that that's the muscle that you're primarily working. When you do this second variation here, I want you to feel this point right here where you feel tension in the hamstring, and then when you bend the back, the tension goes away. So you end up feeling a lot more in your low back. So it's the same thing with a stiff-legged deadlift versus a Romanian. I can do a Romanian, use more weight, really focus on hamstrings and glutes. If I were to do a stiff-legged deadlift, why would I do it? Well, I would do it because I want to strengthen my low back. What's the risk? Well, if I use too much weight, then I'm going to end up risking injury to my low back, because the reality is it takes very, very little weight to work these muscles. Like if that's your argument, hey, I want to strengthen my low back, great, come over to a hyperextension machine and see how little resistance, meaning just our own body weight, that it takes if you round out your back and then extend. See how you feel after 10 reps, and you'll realize it takes very, very little weight to work those muscles. So if you're gonna do a stiff-legged deadlift, because your argument is, I wanna work everything on the posterior chain, hamstrings, glutes, and low back, great, it can be an effective exercise. I just recommend using less weight than you would, say, with a traditional deadlift. That's where I see a big problem, is when people start bending their back and pulling with their back using a lot of weight. I think that's counterproductive, and it sets yourself up for risk of injury. So stiff-legged deadlift versus Romanian kind of depends on what your goal is. For me, I prefer a Romanian because I want to work the hamstrings and the glutes, and I want to minimize the movement in my back because I have a tendency to get really sore there in my low back. It becomes miserable and it makes leg training no fun for me. So I prefer a Romanian. If I wanted to focus more on, like I said, just strengthening low back, I'd probably come here first to the hyperextension. But if I were to do a stiff-legged deadlift, like I said, I would just do it light. So those are my personal preferences. I'm not telling you this is gospel, but it's food for thought. Go try it for yourself and see which one you like. So next time, we'll go ahead and we'll compare the regular deadlift, because that's a totally different animal. So I'll see you then.